first class here. Illustrator has a pretty powerful perspective tool that allows us to attach flat shapes to it and then alter our vanishing points and our horizon to have that flat shape be calculated perspective for us. So we don't have to draw our horizon line, our vanishing points, and then do all that system and do connecting lines. We don't have to use, let's say, overhead projection like we did last year. Illustrator will do all this for us. To access the perspective tool, you can either access it by the tool itself in the toolbar, the perspective grid tool, when clicked on, or when you select Shift P on your keyboard, will show you the grid interface. Okay. Notice what appears, you're seeing a grid formation in the center of your artboard. It's currently set at 2-point perspective. And you see this little icon at the top left. And this icon at the top left allows you to alternate between planes, between the left plane, the right plane, and the horizontal plane, whenever you want to draw. Yeah, it's like a Yuki. Wait, where do we use a Yuki?
Well, it exists in 3DS Max.
Yeah, precisely. Now, another way to access this tool is not by, instead of using the tool in the toolbar, you can also access it by going to View, Perspective Grid, and then selecting what type of perspective you want. So by default, when I use the tool, the 2-point perspective shows up. But if I was working on a product or a project that required a 1-point perspective, I could go to 1-point perspective and select the option there. That will change the grid for me. I could also do the same thing in 3-point perspective, giving myself a 3-point perspective grid. Now, the reason that when we do that, and we see like a side list next to 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective, is because we can customize the grid, save that customization, and have it exist for us in the future. Just like we did our workspace, we can save that arrangement of our horizon and our vanishing points, and then save it as what's called a preset. Now, whenever we want to switch back to that preset or that arrangement of vanishing points and horizons, we can just access it within these options here, under 1-point, 2-point, or 3-point.
Is that only in the document that you're creating those presets for, or is it in?
It's only in the document that you're creating.
Okay.
Yeah. It's only in the document that you're creating because usually the art is attached to that grid, and you'll see that soon.
You can't import presets.
Not that I know of, but I'm going to try to check on those two things. I'm going to try to check on how you can move workspaces over and how you can. I really don't think there's a way to bring over presets out of perspective grids over. Okay. Unless what you could do is you could open up the file that contains your perspective grid, and you can bring it over to a new file. But you can't necessarily just open up a brand new file and open up that preset. Okay. Let me just switch back over to the 2-point perspective grid. I just want you to play around with this a bit. I'm going to specify how to do things here. You'll see. Okay, let me just back up. In my layers palette, all of these layers, when turned visible, they just show you the breakdown of what the grid looks like. All right, those are just for your notes. Don't worry about that. I'd rather you just enable the tool. So then the perspective grid tool or shift on your keyboard, or view perspective grid 2-point. And let me run through how you can manipulate this. At the very bottom of the grid, on the right or left side, you have the ground plane extents. And if you were to click and hold, you can move the entirety of the grid via that way. All right? Those are the only 2 points that you can click on the grid to move the whole grid at once. The left or the right ground extents. You can push the horizon line up or downwards. You see the horizon line here because the orange and the blue plane are vanishing towards them, the vanishing points on them. You can move that horizon upwards or downwards by clicking on those handles and pushing them up or down. Right? So a higher horizon line will make it more of a bird's eye view, a lower horizon line, more of a worm's eye view. All right. You can also pull those vanishing points outwards or inwards to change your field of vision or to create a wider or more narrow cone of vision. The handles for those are the circles that are sitting on the horizon line where the planes vanish to. So if you want to create a wider cone of vision or less distortion, you could pull on those circles to the right and to the left to create a more open cone of vision. Okay. Alternatively, you could have one much closer to your artboard to create a bias, to create more of an asymmetry to the rotation of your object. So the object is not symmetrically rotated in your view, it's slightly skewed. But that is how you manipulate the position of the vanishing points. Recognize that they are fixed to the horizon line as they should always be, so don't expect those points to move vertically in any way. They should rest on that horizon. You can move the orange and the blue plane, what are the right and the left plane, you can move them in space either towards you or away from you to create, instead of like an outwards sort of product grid, you can create more like an inwards interior grid. The two handles here that are attached to the right and the left planes, these gray handles, can be shifted forward in space or backwards in space. So instead I could get a 2-point interior setup instead. Or I can have a plane intersecting another plane. So I can draw from the center outwards. But I can manipulate the placement of those two planes using those handles. Aaron? Handles aren't visible. So if your perspective grid is visible, but there's no manipulation, because your perspective tool is not enabled. You have to go back to your toolbar and select the perspective grid tool to enable the tool. Because as soon as I use another tool in Illustrator, as soon as I use my, let's say, selection tool and click off, those handles become disabled. All right? If ever you want to manipulate your grid, you have to move back to the perspective grid tool or shift key on your keyboard to see those handles again. The grid will only disappear if you close this what do you call that thing at the top left, the view cube. If you close the view cube with the tool, or if you go to view perspective grid, hide grid. Okay. Now you can change the extents of that grid by selecting the diamonds at the top. You can raise them to create a higher grid. So the diamond at the top of those grids either extended upwards or downwards. We move this back in space, back to the origin here. And you can also change how far that grid goes back in space to an extent by using these bottom diamonds attached to the bottom corners of each grid face. So on the orange one here, I can extend it further out to a certain extent. And the same thing with the blue one here. I can extend it further out or make it smaller depending on how much I need. All right. Finally, if you want to change the scaling of those grid tiles, if you want to make them slightly larger or reduce them to a much smaller scale, you can use the diamond in the very middle and then push it upwards to scale it up for a much more simple scale or grid, and then bring it down for a much more reduced scale. That's just some interface parts there. I was zooming in and out and it disappeared at a certain point. That's just a monitor display refresh rate thing. Okay. Now I actually want to show you how to use this. let's move over to that file called attaching. And you'll see that in one artboard I have a perspective grid set up, and I have on the other side these two like flat faces to a building. Okay. The first thing that I want to show you is that you can manipulate your grid and then save it as a preset. So in this left artboard here, I'm just going to use my perspective grid tool. So my handles are now enabled. I'm going to bring this left-hand vanishing point or the right side plane further out a little bit. Right. I'm going to try scaling the grid a little out. So I took that diamond that's in the center and I'm pushing it upwards so it scales outwards more, like that. And that's all. I just wanted to extend it out more horizontally. So I took that diamond in the center and I moved it up. And when I'm happy with that, I'm going to save this as a preset so that if ever I need to refer back to it, I can always load it up again. All right. So once you have your grid set up, you go to View, Perspective Grid, Save Grid as Preset, which gives you additional options to apply to the grid. You can go so far as changing the grid colors, which are currently blue, orange, and green. You can change the opacity of the grid. You can specify the grid units and the scale, or even the viewing angle. And then you can name this grid to your liking. You can use this as, let's say, a product example in this case. And that's pretty generic. 3 buildings. And you see here on the right side, I have these 2 faces of this building that I want to construct in perspective. This happens quite frequently when we're doing projects for like a plan purchase or trying to make a quick mock-up in Vector. Currently, the third-year students are working on a similar project, and I never showed them this tool, but I'm learning now that it would have been really useful for them to because often we have to design things first in orthographic, in flat, and then only later do we need to see them in perspective. So instead of drawing it twice, instead of drawing an orthographic version like we have here on the right side, and then drawing it again in perspective, we can just draw it in orthographic and then put it into the perspective grid and have it illustrated in perspective part for us. All right. To do this, I'm going to select both of these faces, so this left side of the building and the right side of the building, and I'm going to copy them over. You know what? Actually, I'll show you something. I'm going to first turn these into symbols. Okay. So under Window, I'm going to bring up my symbols palette because I don't have it available to me right now. It's not part of my technical lookup. So here I have symbols. And what symbols do is that when we drop art into symbols, they create instances of them. So whenever we want to do replicas of them, we can just drag it out of our symbols palette and into our artboard, and that exact symbol will come out exactly as is. What's more important here is that if ever we alter a symbol, all of those instances will also be updated dynamically. Much like when we have artwork that's linked from like an image file into Illustrator, if we update that artwork, it'll also update in the file itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this left side of the building first into my symbols palette. It asks me for a name for this new symbol. I'm going to say left side building. And I'm just going to say, okay. And you'll see automatically that that artwork gets added to my symbols palette for further use. All right. I'm going to do the same thing with the right side of my building. I'm just going to select all the artwork, which is currently a group. I'm going to drag it into my symbols palette. I'm going to call it the right side building. So now that artwork is kind of locked in place. It's now a symbol. If ever I have a copy of it, which I'm about to do, and I alter that symbol, the those copies will also update as well. This is really important because if ever someone comes back to me and they tell me that they want more windows on this building, or they want the building to be red instead, I can just update the symbol instance itself, and whatever I have in the perspective drawing will also update as well. Right. So let's try getting that into perspective. I'm going to drag the left side building symbol from my symbols palette out to my artboard over here. So I have the artwork in place. I want to take this left side of the building and fix it to the blue grid, to the left-hand surface. With my perspective grid tool, or Shift P on your keyboard, I'm going to go up to my view cube and select the left grid. So it should be the blue plane that is turned on or activated. Sabrina?
They keep selecting like two grids together.
Keep selecting your two
Not grid, the two like squares together.
squares.
The two buildings, sorry.
It's because you brought both buildings in together at once. Okay. So So with my left grid activated, I'm going to go back to my perspective grid tool. I'm going to click and hold to see my perspective selection tool. So nestled under the perspective grid tool is another tool, which we'll use to drag the artwork into the perspective grid. So switch it to that tool, or Shift B on your keyboard. Click on your artwork and then drag it into the grid. And you'll see that it skews to the correct perspective. You can move it back in space, and it will also scale down appropriately. You can move it forward. You see that my building right now is a bit too high for this grid. Maybe I want to be a bit lower. You can also scale it. To scale the artwork in the grid, you use the same tool, the perspective selection tool, but you need to make sure that your bounding box is visible. You won't be able to know that it's visible by just looking at it, but just go to View. At the very middle of your View menu, it'll either say Show or Hide Bounding Box. If it says Hide Bounding Box, that means your bounding box is already visible. Okay? So you want to see that it says Hide, because it means that your bounding box is already being shown. Right? You'll know that the scaling tool will work because if you go to one of the corners, your cursor will have a little scale icon next to it, which is a square with a bigger square moving outwards. If you click on those corners, you can drag that symbol inwards to reduce it or outwards to scale it up. All right? Holding Shift always constrains the scale to be proportional to its original artwork. So in this case, I'm just going to scale that down to about the second level of that grid there. All right? And I'll do the same thing with the other side of the building. I'll bring in that right side symbol, bring it up here. I again will use my perspective selection tool, select that artwork, but don't forget, before I do that, actually backstep a little bit, make sure that you enable the right grid first. So, using my perspective grid tool, I'll select the other grid face, the orange face, because I want to go in the other direction. And then switch back to my perspective selection tool, pick up the artwork, and then drag it in and lock it into place. Again, I can scale this. If I wanted to do a portional scaling, I would hold shift. If I just want to scale it to fit the grid, I can also do that. Just lowering it and expanding it. And so already you kind of get an idea of how you create your cubes, per se, using this tool. Now remember that part about creating these symbols? What's important here is that I still have my orthographic artwork preserved. I'm now just taking it and put it into perspective for my client. If my client comes back to me, my art director comes back to me and they tell me, one, if they want the building side to be red, for example, I can go into that symbol by double-clicking it in my orthographic view here. So with my regular selection tool, double-clicking asks me or prompts me to edit the symbol, and I say, yes, I do. And in here, I can start changing colors. So I'm going to use my group selection tool as the object of the group. So Shift A is my shortcut key that I created last week for the group selection tool. And I can start changing these fill colors to some sort of red. When I exit the symbol by using my selection tool and double-clicking on the side of the artboard, or if I just click on the top left arrow that says exit symbol editing mode, you'll see that in my other artboard, it'll dynamically change because it was a symbol as well. Right? So if ever I get a request for a change to my overall graphic, I can change it in the orthographic view, and my perspective graphic will also change. Same thing applies if I were to go in that symbol and I were to be asked to do more windows. I could select those windows that I have here. Say 1, 2, 3. Make copies of them by holding Option and Shift and dragging them downwards. As soon as I exit that symbol, I see that it adopts in my respective drawing as well. This illustration is freaking tedious. Now, be very careful. If you want to resize things or move things along this grid, you always have to use these same two tools, this perspective selection tool. As soon as you use the regular selection tool and then click on the artwork in the grid and move it, that artwork becomes detached. And if it becomes detached, you can no longer edit it in relation to the grid. Moving the grid or altering the grid will always have it be fixed as one thing. So let's say I were to move it, it would no longer be linked up dynamically. Okay? So if you want to move something, you really have to do so using these two tools. Specifically the perspective selection tool to resize and to move things along the grid. Okay? As soon as you use the regular selection tool in this case, this dynamic adaptation to the perspective no longer is available to you. Alright, there's one more really cool thing about this, and it's that if you, we can fix our scanning points, so we can fix the viewer in place, and then adjust the vanishing points, and as we adjust the vanishing points and the perspective changes, the artwork will change as well. Let's say the client comes back to you and you're like, I don't really like this angle, I want to switch it up, I want to see more of the side of the red building, less of the side of the green and the orange building, or maybe vice versa, maybe I want to see more of the right side, less of the left side. We can lock our standing point and change those vanishing points. To do this, switch back to your perspective grid tool, or Shift key on your keyboard, and in the view cube, select the outside space. Select outside of the cube. So you have no active grid selected. Once you've done that, go to View, Perspective Grid, and lock the station point. The station point is the same thing as your standing point. And the standing point is the viewer. The standing point is the person who is looking at the object of the scene. when we lock that person in place and we switch the vanishing points, all we're doing is we're rotating the object really in space, or rotating the position of the object in relation to that person. Now this is really important when I'm going to be asking you to build three boxes in 3 different rotations, because we'll want to draw one box, then another box, and then rotate that second box to a different orientation, right? So this is how you do that. View perspective grid lock station point. My station point is now locked. Go to either of your vanishing points on the left or right side and move them left or right. You'll see that both planes switch, both planes move together because the station point is fixed. And as I shift this left-hand vanishing point more towards the right, the perspective of my artwork also changes. Same thing in the other direction. If I want to show more of the red building, I would take that right-hand vanishing point and push it towards the center of my artwork, showing me a different perspective, or a different rotation of the object. All right. I had to put all of our. Okay. Any questions on that so far? So remember how to save your grid as a preset? That's view, perspective grid, save grid as preset. Remember how to lock your station points so you can move the vanishing points in place. Those are really the 2 sort of more unintuitive things to do. The rest of it's pretty intuitive. You just click on the plane of your grid that you want to draw in, and you can either attach something to it or draw directly in it, which we'll do now. So let's start off the assignment together. Remember what we're trying to do here is we're trying to just create 3 boxes. They don't have to be perfect cubes, just boxes in perspective with their own unique rotation, so their own set of vanishing points. We'll create an arbitrary light source, and then you'll go ahead and calculate the shadows for these 3 boxes. Okay. So I'm going to create a new. Close everything. I'm going to create a new artboard, and you should do the same. File new. I'm going to create a tabloid document in landscape, so 17 is the width and 11 height, with just one artboard. So here I have an 11 by 17 inch artboard in landscape. Let's start off with by basically just creating one basic cube to begin with. Okay? So using that same perspective grid tool, I'm going to click on it. It's enabled right now, but it's not visible, meaning that my view has it hidden. So I'm going to go to View, Perspective Grid, Show Grid. It was just hidden. And there I see 2 point. All right. I'd like that your horizon be higher than it is now. So I'm going to raise this as so, as such. And I'm going to pull out the vanishing points to create a wider cone of vision. I don't like my vanishing points to be on my artboard. It creates more space just for distortion. I want to widen that out so that I have a wider cone of vision, so there's less distortion in that way. Now, I'm not going to draw using, I'm not going to make a box this big, the size of this cube. I'm probably only going to build it down to about here. So using my perspective tool, I'm going to take that top diamond and just drag it down to about here. And I could even shorten the grid to get the exact dimensions that I want it to be for this first box. You don't have to. You could have still worked in the grid at a larger size anyway. It wouldn't have made a difference. But just want to be specific about things. Then you could resize that grid to the actual shape that you want your box to be in. In layer 1, I'll rename it to Cube 1. So I can start drawing. Now to draw, I'll just use my regular shape tools. In this case, it's because I'm making a box, I use my rectangle tool. I'll start with the left plane. So I'll make sure that that is enabled. I'll make sure my blue plane is the one that's currently selected. And then just down here where the blue and the orange planes intersect, I'll draw my first rectangle. Let me boost the stroke weight so it's more visible. But there it is in perspective, vanishing towards the left-hand vanishing point. Because we're calculating the shadow for this in the future, and because you've done this before, you know that hidden geometry is important, we're going to draw all sides of this box, not just the visible sides. Annalise?
The reason why the rectangle tool was it, I guess, snapped into the grid at the right grid angle, is that automatic or is that because you have to click on the or type something?
The reason that that rectangle actually went in perspective that way is because my left grid plane, the blue plane in my view cube, was enabled. Okay? My perspective grid is visible, and that plane is enabled, which means that anything that I draw within that plane will be attached to that perspective. Okay? So those two things have to happen. The grid has to be visible, and the plane has to be activated. All right. Now, because all hidden geometry needs to be shown, I'm going to take this rectangle that I drew here in the front and then push it towards the back. Okay? Now, if ever you want to move something back or forward in perspective, the shortcut key for this, for some reason, is 5. It's the number 5. All right? But also, because you want to make a copy of this going backwards in space, you also want to hold Option. Option will always make copies of things. So by holding 5 and holding Option, clicking and dragging back, I will, oh, no wait, hold on. One key point here, make sure that your perspective selection tool is enabled, first and foremost. So to move this face backwards towards the right, I first enable my perspective selection tool, or Shift B on your keyboard. I hold 5 and Option, and then I drag it backwards. And that will foreshorten appropriately and perpendicularly to this existing face. I know it's perpendicular because do you see that hairline sort of stroke that's attached to both faces? That means that they're attached to the same sort of vanishing point. They're perpendicular to one another. This is receiving parallel. But yeah, sorry, the face is parallel, but the line that's connecting that is perpendicular. Thank you. And then I can just push that back in space. Okay. Again, that shortcut key to do that, 5 is perpendicular movement, but Option makes a copy. So doing both will do that result. All right. Let me do the same thing for my right-hand plane. I'm going to switch to my orange grid. So using my perspective selection tool, I'll select the right grid. I'll move back to my rectangle tool, and then draw that right face, which should snap corner to corner. Let me just turn off the fill of all of these things so that I can see through them. Now again, to move this thing back, I have to switch back to my perspective selection tool. Hold Option and hold 5, and then click on that face and drag it backwards. All right. Finally, to draw the top and bottom of this, I'll switch to my horizontal grid plane, which is the green plane in this perspective selection tool. And notice that I keep clicking on this view cube with my regular selection tool. It doesn't work. You have to be on the perspective selection tool to select a face or a green plane. In this case, I'm on the flat horizontal plane now, and I'm going to go back to my rectangle tool and then draw both again. Flip the bottom, and instead of making a copy, I'm just going to draw the top. It's a little bit faster. I have all my corners, so I know exactly where to go. And there I have my first box. All right. Notice these corners here, they're jutting out past the volume. That's just because of the stroke type and what's called its corner limit. If you look up at my stroke palette here, I'm going to drag it out for you. You see my stroke palette here, it has a limit. This is just an arbitrary value, and depending on how high or low it is, it'll create these really sharp corners if the value is too low for the angle of the stroke corner. Okay? Either you can raise this limit higher so that that corner becomes flat, or you can just select all of these paths. I'm going to marquee select everything here. And I'm going to change the corner appearance from this miter join to this round join. By selecting a round join, those corners become cute, for lack of a term. They become rounded, okay?
Chubby. They get chubby.
Alright, I'm gonna move my stroke. How about that? When I'm satisfied with this cube, or this box, and I want to move on to another box, what I want to make sure is that I save this grid as a preset before I move on to drawing a new object, right? Because even though I'm satisfied with it now, if ever I want to change it, I want to make sure that I have this grid available to me so that I can make any scaling or modifications to the perspective of this, all right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this preset, view, perspective grid, save grid as a preset. And I'm going to just save it as box 1, all right? When this is saved, whenever I need to refer back to it, it's always under view, perspective grid, and because it's a 2-point perspective grid, that was the base with which I started with, it'll be docked under 2-point perspective grid. You see it here, it's box 1. All right? Okay. Yes.
Can you change the perspective? Is it like stuck on the grid? So that when you look at
Yeah, right now, currently, this box is attached to this grid. So if you wanted to rotate it, because it's still attached, we can do what we did before with the building. We can lock our station point and then rotate the vanishing points to get a different orientation of this, all right? Let's do that together right now. To rotate this box, you can go back to your perspective grid tool and select outside of the view cube. All right? You would then go to view, perspective grid, lock station point, and then you would push your vanishing point to the left or to the right to get a different orientation of the perspective. Now you see what happened there? That top plane is just a little bit, it's moving a little bit of a weird way. Sometimes that happens. All you have to do to adjust that is go back to your perspective selection tool and then readjust it. Right? It's not a perfect system. It just needs a bit of a correction. But it'll allow you to rotate that drawing dynamically. Okay? So I've rotated that box. Let's see what happens if I go back to perspective grid box 1. Right? You see that my grid moved back to its original position, but my box stayed rotated. All right? That's perfectly fine, and a perfectly suitable way for us to create other boxes at different perspectives. So once you've created that first box, rotate it out of its original perspective, all right? Reset your perspective grid, and then draw a new box. So now that we're here, I'm going to readjust this grid. I'm going to enlarge it and move it over a bit. So I'm going to use my perspective grid tool again. I'm going to enlarge this plane, give it more height, push this plane backwards over here, bring this blue plane over. And then maybe draw my cube at the intersection of this orange and blue plane. Right? Now, why is this really important that I'm doing it this way in this order? It's because by doing it this way, I'm maintaining the distances of my vanishing points. By locking my station point in place, and by never switching my horizon line, I'm maintaining the same sort of standing point for the viewer. This is really important when you're doing objects in different multiple vanishing points, right? Because if I didn't lock my station point and then move my vanishing points around, that second box won't look like it's in the same perspective or the same environment as this first box. I can draw another Q2. I can draw the red face. Go back to my selection tool, perspective selection tool, select that face with option 5 and drag it. Drag it. No. Option 5, drag it. No.
You're on the left plane, you want to hold the right plane?
Not quite. No, that worked.
Oh, okay.
So basically just did the same thing, but a third time. And then I drag it back. Now I'll switch planes, draw my other face, and drag it back. Switch to my horizontal grid, and draw that top face. Because now this cube is attached to the grid, if I wanted to, I could save this preset for the future, or I could rotating this to give it another rotation. So again, just to double check my work, perspective grid tool, I will select the outside of the view cube, go to view, perspective grid. The station point's already locked, that's great. And then I'll rotate this cube to a different angle as well. Sorry. So you see that right now both boxes are dynamically changing. If you want to edit this, you can detach this box here by first making a copy of it. So I would actually copy cube 1, block and hide the original, and then detach the copy. So I lock and hide the original cube 1. I'm going to select the layered cube 1 copy, go to object, perspective, and then nope. I'm going to use my direct selection tool and click on that to hopefully release it. 1 second. Object, perspective, release with perspective. So now this copy is released. Starting one more time. Because I want to preserve the perspective of this first cube or this first box, I have to release it, but I don't want to lose the original artwork. I want to make sure that I have something that's dynamic. So I made a copy of that layer. I locked and hid the original, and then the copy itself, I selected the paths, and then I went to object, perspective, release with perspective. It's deactivated now because it's already released, but if it was attached, this would be available to you. And you release it so that it no longer changes when you rotate the vanishing points. So moving back to here, I can switch this, and you see that only my second box rotates. Again, there's that slight shift at the top there. Let's put a different angle here. Once you get the correct rotation that you desire, using my perspective selection tool, I'll just readjust the top to match the corners more precisely. Yes, Chelsea.
Anytime we're trying to rotate my cube, if the current set apart completely, and then if I try to do the sides selection, let's rejoin them, they're not on the same perspective.
Okay, I'll come to you with that. Any other questions on this? Sorry. The second grid, I started by building, I just took my first grid, which is a preset. So I took this one here, view, perspective grid, box 1, this preset that I had saved. I took it here, and I just readjusted this grid. So what I did here was, I took these handles, I took this up, I made it higher, I took these handles and moved them across in space to bring it over, so I could work more to the side. And then I drew my cube in this grid here. I could have saved it as box 2. But then once I drew that, then I moved my vanishing points to give it a slight rotation as well. Alright? And now I'll do the same thing with the third cube, which I'll just let you do on your own. Basically, just readjust your grid over to the side here. You move these over, get a new space for it. You can increase this or lower this as you wish. You choose this again. Just because the grid cells are not visible doesn't mean that your object won't lock to the grid. So long as you specify the plane that you want it to lock to, whether it's left, right, or horizontal in the view cube, your rectangle will always lock to that surface. Okay? So it doesn't matter that my right orange plane is invisible here. It's still part of the interface. It's still going to snap to that array. Create 3 boxes in perspective using this tool. Put in a light source. Now your light source, before I leave you to do that, can be anywhere in this drawing. All right. Remember how it works. Your light source could just be a simple line and circle. But if I place one, I'm going to hide my perspective tool for now, just assuming that I'm done with it. The top of your light source, or the top of your line, represents the top of your light. So that's where the light source will originate from. And the very bottom of that stick represents where the ground direction will originate from. Okay? So it can be simple as a graphic like this. In the end, you can delete this. Actually, don't delete this. Show me where it is, because it needs some calculation. But it needs to pass through all the boxes to show the shadow. Realize that if you extend your ground direction long past your artport, and you can do this, you can have your light be outside of your artport, I don't mind. But by bringing that ground direction all the way downwards out of my artport, my light source is now between me and the objects, the shadow will be pushed back away from me. If that ground direction is up high, my light source is behind the objects, it will push the shadows towards me. Okay? So utilize that knowledge in understanding and strategizing how you want your shadows to look in this setup. Okay? I will come around to take a look if any of you have issues with your perspective grid.